Hey NAI football fans, Corey Thorpe here with another edition of the NAIFBALL podcast powered by AdCraft USA, your custom apparel, merch, and uniform experts. Our friends at AdCraft have been with us for many years now. They've run web stores for us multiple times. These guys are NAI fans and family who are experts in the apparel and merchandise world. AdCraft allows you to take the hassle out of ordering. Let their knowledgeable design and customer service staff handle everything from hosting the store online, shipping the product, and helping your customers so you can get back to the game. Find them online at adcraftusa.com. All right, NAI football fans, you heard the ad read, and we are live here on a beautiful Thursday night here in the Florida Panhandle in Big Bend. We previewed the AAC last week, John, and this week we're going out west.
Right, absolutely. So, if you guys didn't know, we're going with the Frontier Conference today. Their roots go back all the way to 1935, and they are very isolated out there. Them and the North Star have a lot of similarities. Fun fact about the Frontier, Corey, they only have 3 out-of-conference games this year. They play a round-robin schedule, and only 3 teams in the Frontier will be playing out-of-conference games.
Although from what I hear, they're really looking to put an end to that round-robin scheduling.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's pretty cool because all those schools, have a lot of they're not close proximity because they're out in Big Sky. Everything's far away out there.
Right.
But, they're so familiar with each other. It's pretty cool that they get to see each other twice, and you get to see them improve.
But honestly, no coach in their right mind wants to see a team twice. I don't care if it's Sisters of the Poor.
Right.
You don't want to play them twice.
No, not at all.
So yeah, you're definitely looking for that to open up a little bit. And so we start at the bottom like we did last week. Thought that worked well, and we start with the lights of MSU Northern with their new head coach Jerome Sowers. That's an in-conference selection too.
Yeah, so really interesting. He's kind of a legend in that regional area of football. I'm looking forward to how fast of a pace he can bring up, Corey. What's funny about some of these Frontier Conference teams is, in the Southeast, we're used to these Florida teams like signing everybody and their brother at times, just handing it out like candy, where these Frontier teams, they kind of really got to like you if they want you to come on. He brought a lot of in-state talent in. And I'm just looking forward to if he can get a fast pace to where they were 1-9 a year ago. They've really been dormant for a long time.
Yeah, last year was their first year in a while that they actually won a game.
Right.
And we had folks telling us before the year, watch out, this is the year that MSU Northern gets their first win in conference in a minute.
Right.
And it came true. They definitely made improvements.
Well, you're just wondering. He was just last at Southern Oregon. He was at Northern Arizona for a time. He's been coaching well over for 40 years. It sounds like a man that wants to go out on his terms and wants to go out successful. He's not ready to give it up. You know what I'm saying? It's like the next project at Bay for him. Can he just flip this thing around? And, the crazy thing is, Corey, and we say it a lot, talking about major college football, there's some that just have keys to the Cadillac, and, it takes a lot to crash it.
Right.
Where, it's more impressive, like the David Cutcliffes of Duke, to go out and take, a struggling, dormant ACC team to the ACC championship game or to bowl games. They never went. So looking forward to seeing how he does here. He has nothing to prove to anybody. Obviously, he's a legend. It speaks for itself.
Right.
But it adds on to the legacy at this point.
And they do return a lot of pieces: a quarterback, a running back, wide receiver, some defensive spots. Really, all they're losing is defensive lineman Joe Fear here, who had 11 TFLs and 7.5 sacks a year ago.
Right, and we talked about before we came on air that their last year's defensive team, gave up just under 6 yards, which is not very good at all.
No, it's not.
But in some leagues in NAI, that's middle of the road right there.
Right, but you're talking about the Frontier where
defense is king at times.
Absolutely. So we'll have to see. Really, MSU Northern's offense last year was abysmal, would be putting it nicely. 3 3/4 offensive yards per play. That's not going to get it done at all. You do return Tristan Willis on the offensive line, Dylan Wampler in your linebacking core, and Isaiah Paul in your defensive secondary. So you do have a lot of defensive pieces coming back if you're the Lights. You just got to figure out if you're going to get that offense moving.
Right, absolutely. A lot to work with there, but the thing is there's only one way to go up for them.
Absolutely. But there's a large gap, in terms of record-wise between MSU Northern and the next team up, which would be Montana Tech, the Ore Diggers. They, look, we talked about MSU Northern's offense being 3.75 yards per play. I mean, Montana Tech was a whole half a yard per play better at 4.38 yards per play. And so the Ore Diggers are, I believe, breaking in a relatively new coach, not brand spanking new, but within a couple years here. And we'll just have to see if they can continue to dig their way out of the bottom of the Frontier Conference.
Well, we talked about on our Twitter page the other day, I know a big goal of the Ore Diggers is to win that Carroll College rivalry game they have going on. I think they've lost the last 3 or 4. They ended 2022 on a positive note for the most part. They shut out Montana State Northern to end the year, and then they won 3 out of their last 4. The thing is, and I think a lot of it speaks to this whole conference, who's going to match up with Montana Western? The team that that was really solid last year.
And I think there's a couple of teams that can definitely go toe to toe with them.
Yeah, and and we're about to talk about this group of Montana Tech, Carroll, Rocky Mountain had an impressive. They went 7-3 last year. They were very solid. A couple plays away. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely. We just talked about the distance. The middle of the road teams, all in this conference. We say middle of the road, all have striking distance to be champ this year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if you're Montana Tech, you're returning a wide receiver and a quarterback, and your wide receiver, a couple wide receivers at that. So you've got a good offensive core to build around. You're going to have to deal with losing Hunter Sparts, who was an all-conference offensive lineman. And so that's really a big deal. Montana Tech, did really good up until the end of the end part of the year, like you were saying. And that front half is why they're where they are right now.
Well, the big thing is we're going to know how good they are opening their season, whether it's going to be special or middle of the road again with that game against Carroll to open the game, open the season.
Nothing better than starting your year off with a rivalry. The next team kind of perplexes me, John. I mean, when I say Southern Oregon, in terms of the last 15 years of NAIA football, you're talking about a team that has time and again been a mainstay in the playoffs and in the national championship.
Well, fun fact, Corey, that I believe Frontier has 7 national championship teams, 6 of them for Carroll. The only other team to win one for the conference or for themselves is Southern Oregon, when they're basically a brand new spanking program.
Beat Marion,
I believe in 2013. Correctly. We're coming up on the.
I think it was 14.
14
because
okay,
I'm
8 years
fairly
ago.
Certain Grandview won in 13.
There we go. So 2014. When they first came on the scene, they sent a lot of coaches on to better jobs because they exploded so well. And, Corey, I don't know if you've ever seen their stadium and stuff, but I've never been, but it looks gorgeous.
It is gorgeous.
And, just wondering if they can get back to that brand of football that they had, just exciting offense. Last year, they only had under 5 yards a play for offense. That used not to be Southern Oregon football.
I mean, here's the thing: if you're Southern Oregon, you're replacing your quarterback and your main running back. You are bringing back Bryce Goggin at wide receiver and a couple of other wide receivers down the depth chart here. You have Shane McLaughlin, who's going to be returning kicks, and you got to get him involved, because if you've got a kick returner who plays wide receiver,
yeah, well, especially at NAI level, I can understand at different levels. A kick returner could be like the X factor specialty guy, but if he's dominating that kick return and stuff, you got to get him, killing him in offense.
Absolutely. So the question is really going to be, replacing the quarterback. Who are you going to have as your signal caller?
Right.
We know from statistics that teams who return a higher percentage of receiving yards, regardless of who is the quarterback, the more receiving yards you bring back, the better your team is going to be offensively. It helps integrate a new quarterback into your offense. We know this of looking at the statistics from levels of college football. Can Southern Oregon get back up to prominence?
That's an interesting question. They're one of these teams that do not have an out-of-conference game, I believe. They're playing the round-robin schedule. They start out with Rocky Mountain, so we'll find out pretty quick.
We will. That's a great way to start out. It's a good measuring stick for Southern Oregon to start out with the Battling Bears. So we go from Southern Oregon then to Eastern Oregon, and we appreciate you, Eastern Oregon, especially for that beautiful stadium that you see behind us, that beautiful night shot there from them. John, this was my pick last year.
I believe it might have been both of our picks last year.
To win the Frontier. I thought maybe you picked College of Idaho.
Maybe I did. I don't remember. I know I was pretty high on Eastern Oregon. I thought you picked College of Idaho. Maybe I'm switched.
We'll have to find out. Eastern Oregon does lose a lot of huge pieces on their defensive line in Sage DeLon and Chase Van Wyck.
Yeah, so, the Eastern Oregon is one of those three teams that have a out-of-conference game, Corey. They play Whitworth, a Division III team out of the Northwest Conference, who went 7-3 last year, and they play them very early in the season. That's going to be a big measuring stick game. One of the advantages I feel like these Frontier teams face is that if you win a out-of-conference game, I think it props you up in seeding if you can win your conference. If you win out-of-conference, that one out-of-conference game and your conference, I think it props you up in seeding to where Montana Western was traveling last year to Lindsey Wilson as the Frontier champion.
And they had that early win over Dickinson State,
which they'll get a chance again. But back to Eastern Oregon, I think that could really prop them up, really going.
And I just checked my numbers. I did call College of Idaho in the Frontier last year with Eastern Oregon as my dark horse last year. So I'm, a little bit of a cold take there on Eastern Oregon, unfortunately, last year for me. What really surprised me, they did start out sort of fast and then fell off. They finished with a negative net yards per play. And so for Eastern Oregon, you've got to replace your quarterback, who was your leading rusher in a slew of wideouts. You do get back a couple of linebackers in Solo Taylor and Hayden Brandon, but you've got a lot of offensive pieces to put back together.
Also, I want to say I did misspoke earlier. Montana Tech does not start out with Carroll. That's the second game. They start out with Eastern Oregon first.
Still really
good measuring stick game.
Especially for two teams that you're going to see.
They need to be heading the right direction.
Right, exactly. So we'll have to see what Eastern Oregon's going to do. They've got a long-term head coach there, 15, 16 seasons, that knows what he's doing. And we'll just have to see if Eastern Oregon can really get it turned around, get your new signal caller in place, and get going the right direction. And now we got to get into the part of the Frontier.
The beefy part.
Yeah, where you've got positive yards per play, whether it be that you're really good at offense or you're really good at defense or you're fairly good at both. These are basically your teams that are over 500 here. And we start with the Battling Bears of Rocky Mountain, who I don't want to say came out of nowhere last year, but we definitely underestimated them.
And I'll say Rocky Mountain was so close to winning the conference last year. and I want to say I misspoke again about Montana Western because they beat Dickinson State last year.
Yeah.
So you would think that helps prop them up. I think the league needs to look at that. If you get an out-of-conference game, prop them up in seeding, reward them for that because they did have to travel, even doing both things I just said. But anyways, back to Rocky Mountain. They were an overtime game away from being that playoff team last year against Montana Western. They lost in double overtime, I think 42-50, but they beat Montana Western earlier in the season. And, they had to be kicking themselves off to a slow start that last game against Montana Western because they didn't score the first half, Corey.
That really did set up, that Rocky Mountain win set up this just beautiful three-way tie for first in the Frontier last season, where, I tell you, Montana Western, when we talked with their head coach in the summer, they didn't even know at the end of the game that they needed to score a touchdown to win the Frontier.
Absolute bonkers.
He had a field goal team out there. Someone went, Coach, you need a touchdown here to win the conference. And he went, I think I'll call a timeout now, please.
Right. Well, they have to be excited with Nathan Dick coming back. That last game we're talking about against Montana Western, he threw for 4 touchdowns. Slow going, but he got caught fire. I think the big thing is, we crapped on Montana State Northern for their defense yardage, but Rocky Mountain's still in that same area.
The thing about Rocky Mountain, though, is that their offense was so good that they were able to dig themselves
out of it. But
just
imagine if you got a little balance this year.
If Rocky's defense can come around, and they've got some good pieces coming back, and Wes Mawai, Nola McCafferty, and Ty Reynolds, why throw at Ty Reynolds? 3 picks and 6 PBUs. You're not completing the ball to that side of the field. But if you're the Battling Bears, if you can get some defense going here, you could really make some noise. And look, it wasn't that long ago that Nathan Dick was battling out for the quarterback spot.
Yeah. The small amount of times I did get to see Rocky last year through highlights and stuff, it seemed like their secondary, shined at times, but they took so many chances because they did get a lot of interceptions. I mean, they did get a lot of interceptions, but they also got burned on sometimes.
That's what happened. And sometimes I don't mind that, especially if you're looking to get the ball back to an explosive offense who likes to go up tempo. That matching of that defensive style, going high risk, high reward, can sometimes be very beneficial to an offense who's also very explosive. Give your team more chances at bat and more chances to score points. Obviously, they can, as we saw in that 50-42, overtime game. That wasn't a problem. So, but then we look at the other side of balance, and we look at the Carroll Saints.
Yeah, so Carroll, who won the league with a 3-2 record during the COVID season. I think people thought they were going to do it again. And at times I think Carroll lives off of their name because people think of the 6 national championship teams, the Van Dyke era, But I think Carroll's slowly starting to trend back to that consistent program that's always going to be in the mix of it. You talked pre-show with me, Corey, that they're returning almost everybody except for T.J. Abraham, the all-conference defensive back.
They really are, and shout out to the folks out there. We talked about last week. We talked about Reinhardt and Reinhardt establishing that culture where you're keeping guys all 4 years, and when you do go next man up, the next man up is a really nice player. Kind of like we talked about Morningside. I feel like Carroll is that team for the Frontier where it sometimes doesn't matter who they do lose. They're always going to replace them with someone really nice.
And their stadium's absolutely gorgeous as well. The atmosphere. I love the atmosphere.
There are so many pretty stadiums in the Frontier. I mean, Florida Atlantic can say that they're 5 miles away from the beach, but if you're in the stadium, you can't see the beach from their stadium.
Hard to beat mountains overlooking.
It's really hard to beat the mountains. Carroll brings back 3 all-conference offensive linemen.
That's hard to beat.
That is really hard to beat. They return their quarterback, some of their wide receivers, most of their defense, including Garrett Kokab and Rex Irby, and Duncan Kraft at running back, and Burgess at running back as well. That's a team who I really think could take a major step offensively, where they were 4th in the conference, middle of the road a year ago, and with a really good defense, allowing only 4.3 yards per play, could be a really good pick to win the Frontier.
They're the sexy pick. But I think another sexy pick might be College of Idaho. And the only beef I had from these guys last year, 5 out of their 10 games were one-possession games. I'd like to see more separation of that. And they were also a team that beat Montana Western. They were part of that, 3-way tie, I think, right?
Yeah, they absolutely were. 7-3 a year ago. But you lose your workhorse in Nick Calzaretta.
Right, absolutely. He just right under 1,000 yards in 10 games. That's impressive to be almost a 1,000-yard rusher.
Now, you do bring back Dylan Martinez, who was our Defensive Player of the Week 1 week with an absolutely monster game. You do return your quarterback, some of your wide receivers, most of your defense. So a good defense could get better here for College of Idaho. It's a team who, look, for the entire time we've covered College of Idaho, they've been a feast or famine team.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to the development of Ryan Hibbs, the quarterback. Boise, I believe he's from Boise, a Boise native. So Caldwell's right there. I'm excited to visit College of Idaho, I think, next weekend.
Next weekend?
Yeah, next weekend. Yeah, I'm going to be there. That's June 10th through the 14th. So I think the development of him as a quarterback is going to be the big key there. I think he's got to be a playmaker because he kind of went quiet. That offense of College of Idaho as a total went quiet that last game against Carroll. And, you win that game, you're in.
Right. It's winning, you're in.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of teams went quieter against Carroll.
That's true, yeah.
That's not uncommon here. But we end our look at the teams with Montana Western, who went 7-3 in conference, 8-4 out of conference, a conference win against Dickinson State, and obviously the season-ending loss to Lindsey Wilson. You get a lot of pieces coming back if you're Western starting under center with John Jund.
Right. Well, not only him, who he does a fantastic job of facilitating, doing whatever he needs to do. But what about the wide receiver, Trey Mounts? Maybe Bill Belichick looks at him in free agency. He kind of fits the mold there of what Bill looks for. Shifty, and he's a good kick return, punt returner as well. Quality if they let him have that role again.
The only thing that kind of makes me iffy on Montana Western is you're losing almost 2,000 yards of receiving talent between Nate Simpkins and Jameson Hermanson. That's going to be a huge couple of pairs of shoes to fill if you're Montana Western. Can you find the athletes who are going to fill those shoes?
That's where I think Trey Mounts is going to have a big role this year.
He's going to have to be. And then defensively, you lose Joe Caicedo and Kyle Schultz. And Caicedo was all over the field for them. Those two were their only all-conference picks there at linebacker. Who steps up defensively in the middle for Montana Western?
I can tell you one thing for certainty, Corey. I don't know who for sure will win the Frontier, but I am picking Montana Western for sure this year to beat Dickinson State. I think I've learned my lesson.
We got that a little wrong last year, guys. Man, and I tell you that Montana Western had a good offense, almost 6 yards per play. That is, you look at who was second there in Rocky, they're 5.71. That's a reasonably good.
And they were balanced.
Right. Fifth in defensive yards per play. Balance between rushing the ball and throwing the ball.
Right.
Reese Neville with almost 1,000 yards. John Jund with almost 500 yards. It was a well called offense and a defense that can take a step forward, has a lot of room for growth. Look, if Montana Western's defense steps up and their offense stays relatively the same, this is Montana Western's division.
Right. I agree with that. I think we're looking at another 3-team race, and then I'm looking forward to seeing who's going to come out of Eastern Oregon and Montana Tech to make that next step. And then, just Montana State Northern. They played some teams tough last year, but they're on a new direction just to see maybe who they can surprise.
I definitely think that MSU Northern probably gets at least another win this year in conference, jumps up and surprises someone. But, John, it is about that time. Who are you going to be taking to win the division? I'm
going, a lot of the times recently here, I feel like we haven't had many repeating Frontier champions. But I'm going to go with Montana Western, just having an all-conference quarterback returning, all-conference receiver. A lot of all-conference players across the board just coming back. I know Carroll's the sexy pick, but I'm going with Montana Western.
I've been debating about this all day as I've been putting together these stats, just looking at them and trying to figure out who I'm going to be taking with, both my conference pick and my dark horse pick. I'm going to have to go with Western as well. I mean, you've got a returning quarterback, and that says a lot. And he acquitted himself nicely against a Lindsey Wilson defense that was really good last year. The game didn't look too big for him at that. So I think, the road goes through Montana Western, goes through the Bulldogs. You say that you've got a three-way. Can you pick one of those three as your dark horse? I mean,
for my dark horse, I'm going for Eastern Oregon, who started off the year hot. They beat the champs early within the season, looked fantastic early in the season, and then midway through, they just fell off the rails. But I think they're going to come back. I think they're going to come back a lot better this year, a little bit more consistent with just the guys they have returning. Mm-hmm. I think they maybe learned that lesson that, hey, if we're good enough to do it once, why can't we just be consistent with it?
Yeah. If we're looking at someone outside that top three of Carroll, College of Idaho, and Montana Western, I'm going to have to go with Rocky. They're not going to surprise anyone this year.
No.
I almost hate picking them as a dark horse. I think Carroll will be neck and neck with them, if not just a nose better. Just looking at what they're bringing back, but there's a lot coming back there at Rocky, and if Coach Stutzram can get that defense doing what it needs to do, you could really have a team that challenges Montana Western and the rest of those top three there for that division title.
I totally agree with you. I see your logic.
So, there you have it. The Frontier Conference. One of my favorite conferences. I mean, it doesn't get a lot of love, but that is a tough conference.
Well, it's absolutely just ridiculously tough. I just talked about Eastern Oregon beating the champs last year, but also losing a 5-overtime game to Montana State Northern.
That the parity is
that was
insane.
Ridiculous. So,
they do not get enough love.
No.
Every conference thinks they don't get enough love. The Frontier has the strongest case.
I agree. North Star as well. Both those just so isolated, but
they are.
And then you'll have the Sooner Athletic come and tell us them too. But
yeah, I know. I look at the North Star and I see Dickinson and I see Valley City sometimes, and I see a Waldorf team that's getting better.
Right.
But usually it's Dickinson State and the Pack, and the Sooner it's whether it's going to be Arizona Christian, Segu, or Langston, or Ottawa of Arizona. You've pretty much got one team in the Pack. Here, I can't think of another conference offhand, but outside of the Mid-States Mid-East, who has 4 teams who could reasonably win the division, and you wouldn't have to make a very hard argument at all.
No, absolutely not.
And if they didn't have to travel, if the Frontier can host a playoff game, I guarantee you, I don't care who you bring in there except for maybe Morningside. And why would they host Morningside?
Yeah.
I don't care who you bring in there. They're probably going home.
Well,
and
a couple
there.
years ago, College Idaho made a little run there.
Yeah, they got to host that game.
Yeah.
That was the big deal. Who do they play? Ottawa of Arizona?
I can't remember that. Let me look it up real quick.
I thought they pitted the two Western teams against each other, if I remember
2019, correctly. Right?
Might have been 20?
No, it was 2019.
Was it 2019?
Okay, yeah, it was Ottawa, Arizona.
Yeah, they pitted the two Western teams against each other.
And then they had to travel to Grandview and only lost 14-6. That was
that was a
great College Idaho team. Peterson was the quarterback.
That was the one, Darius James Peterson. That was the one that rattled off 10 wins in a row, wasn't it? It
was the year before they lost 5 games.
That's
and then
right.
won 5 games in a row.
And then
they went undefeated till the last game. They went 11-1.
That's right. They had that ridiculous
16-game winning streak. Yeah, unheard of in NAIA football for the most part, except for Morningside.
Yeah, about to say unless you're Morningside, but this is a good division, a good conference. And if you're not watching the Frontier, you really should, because there's a lot of hard hitting, defensive, running oriented football. But until next time, in which I think we'll settle a little bit more in the middle of the country instead of going to the south of the Northwest, John.
I'm totally cool with that.
So for John Cooper, I am Cory Thorpe, and we will see y'all next week. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the NAIAFBALL podcast presented by AdCraft USA. Be sure to contact them for all your custom apparel, merch, and uniform needs. Thanks also to Mommy Bay Turf and Turf Nation, as well as Leading Edge Fundraising for their support of the podcast. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to the podcast as well as to our YouTube channel. Leave us a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. As always, if you'd like to support what we do, head over to patreon.com/NAIAFBALL and become a patron. We can't do what we do without our sponsors and listeners like you.